3 weeks before they erased me, I signed the biggest drone surveillance deal in Stratuslink history. $920 million, 0 cents, 5 federal agencies, and my signature on every line. But by the time the press release went live, my name was gone. No credit, no voice, just a forced emotion and a polite silence from HR. What they didn't know? I had planted a clause in that contract that would eat them from the inside, and it was already counting down. I didn't need to shout, I just waited, and when the fallout hit, no one remembered them. Only the woman they tried to erase. If you've ever been erased, overlooked, or quietly betrayed, this story is for you. Hit subscribe, share your thoughts below, and let's talk about what quiet power really looks like. They didn't fire me, they erased me while I was still sitting in the chair. That's what stung. The contract was signed, the jets were funded, the champagne was still cold in the executive fridge, and I, Avery Reed, was no longer real. My office? Gone. My title? Reassigned. My name? Quietly deleted from the project I had bled over for 18 months. It didn't happen in a shouting match or a dramatic HR confrontation. It happened in fluorescent silence behind polished doors with legal language so clean it sliced through my identity without leaving a mark. That morning, I had reported to the West Wing of Bell Ridge Aerospace headquarters, still basking in the afterglow of the $920 million 0 cents defense deal I had secured with the Department of Defense. By afternoon, I was walking down the carpeted corridor holding a cardboard box containing 3 pens, a sealed folder, and a nameplate that no longer applied. They didn't say, I failed. They didn't say I disappointed them. They didn't say anything. No farewell, no transition, just a new desk, windowless, cubicle 4C, decorated with a Post-it on the monitor, set up by EOD Claire. That was it. No welcome back, no acknowledgement that I'd just spent months negotiating with the most unyielding legal minds in the Pentagon. The walls of that cubicle were made of fabric and secrets. There was no phone, no assigned assistant. Someone had left a used phone cord curled in the drawer like a dead snake. I opened the bottom drawer and saw a single contract, my contract. Only now, my initials had been scratched out and overridden in Sharpie. C.L. Claire Loudon. Claire hadn't done the deal. Claire had never met Brigadier Farnsworth or walked the airstrip with naval procurement. Claire had been in HR onboarding while I was sweating through 14-hour days in DC hotels. But now she was the face of it, the credit, the bonus, the corner office. Claire, they had taken everything except the one thing I had left behind like a ghost in the attic. Clause 9F. The line nobody read because they assumed it was standard language. Operational oversight shall remain under Avery Reed. In the event of reassignment, the client reserves the right to nullify this agreement. I wrote that clause not out of arrogance, but out of survival. I'd seen what happened when women were pushed aside the moment the ink dried, seen them turn into myths, brilliant minds reduced to water cooler legends while someone else cashed the check. So I added it, quietly, deliberately. I didn't even tell my manager, Dale, or the SVP, Morgan. I buried it in the oversight section where no one ever looked unless something went wrong. And something was about to go very wrong. Because while they were busy rearranging org charts and announcing promotions, they forgot one simple thing. The client trusted me, not the company, not the logo, not Claire. They trusted the woman who had shown up time and again, even when no one else did. And deep inside the Pentagon, someone was reading Clause 9F. Someone who didn't forget. I wasn't just demoted, I was silently buried. No announcement, no explanation, no farewell email, just a sudden shift in access rights and a login that now returned insufficient clearance. That's how I knew I was no longer who I used to be. The air around me didn't mourn, the halls didn't hush. Because that's the thing about erasure, it leaves no echo. Dale, my former director, didn't look me in the eye. He passed me in the hallway with a smile that almost convinced me I'd imagined the whole thing. I watched Claire, my replacement, bask in an orientation tour I once gave to others. I heard her ask about travel policies I had written. She used my PowerPoint template. She echoed phrases from my training decks. She even parroted one of my signature phrases in the leadership meeting. Forward integrity is better than backward loyalty. And the room applauded like it was her. I didn't correct anyone. That would have required speaking. And I had no voice there anymore. They'd cut my salary by 55%. On paper, it was a lateral move into process continuity. In reality, it was a bureaucratic coma. No path forward, no metrics, no promotion cycle, just a folder full of old workflows and a calendar filled with placeholder meetings that no one attended. But I wasn't there to be seen anymore. I stayed because ghosts can still read the blueprints. From my corner of irrelevance, I watched everything. I saw which contracts were moving. I saw where the vulnerabilities lay. I noted who was copying my notes and claiming them as internal collaborations. And most importantly, I saw who was paying attention outside our walls. Enter Ethereum Technologies. A smaller player, focus, underestimated. Not flashy, but precise. They didn't have our legacy systems. They didn't have our marketing budget. What they did have was a gap. They lacked someone who could build trust at a federal level, someone who could walk into the Air Logistics Command and not flinch under scrutiny. They'd reached out once before, casually. I had declined out of loyalty. But now, loyalty had left me buried in a cubicle with no door and no future. So I replied. We met at a quiet cafe near DuPont Circle. Their VP of Ops, Samuel Kent, didn't ask for my resume. He asked for my strategy. He didn't question why I was interested. He said, if you join us, I won't promise a title, but I'll give you one thing. I won't let you vanish. It wasn't flattery. It was clarity, the kind that cuts through grief. That night, I signed an NDA, not out of spite, but because I had finally found someone who understood that silence was not consent. That being overlooked doesn't mean you aren't watching, and that sometimes the most dangerous kind of revenge isn't loud, it's deliberate, it's data-driven, and it starts with the people they stop noticing. It wasn't betrayal that changed the game. It was a handwritten letter slid under my hotel room door at 11:47 p.m. with a single line, to the one who earned our confidence through action, not title. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at those words, my mind racing with every unspoken moment I'd swallowed in silence. The letter was signed by General Erickson of the Holston Eurova Jet program, the man whose approval could shift a $920 million, 0 cents federal drone contract overnight. And that signature now pointed to me. Not Dale, not Claire, me. Because in a boardroom weeks prior, while Claire had fumbled through the proposal with laminated charts and rehearsed lines, I had sat quietly in the back and waited until he asked one question. Who actually oversaw the compliance conditions for integration? Everyone turned to Claire. Claire turned to me. And I answered, not with puffed up jargon, but with precise, grounded facts. That was the moment he saw through the theater. And that was the moment I began writing the clause. Clause 47B wasn't revenge. It was insurance. It stated simply that the contract would remain valid only if operational oversight remained under the individual who had led compliance and integration design. I didn't name myself. I didn't need to. It was a line crafted in plain English, buried in legal terms, backed by precedent, and unread by executives too arrogant to imagine someone like me holding the pen. When I received the letter, I knew he had found it. I knew he had read it, and I knew what it meant. The plan didn't come all at once. It unfolded in strands. First, I brought the clause to Ethereum's legal counsel. They read it 3 times. Then they asked me if I was absolutely sure I had drafted it. I nodded. Their eyes lit up. Not with revenge, but with possibility. The second strand was the client meeting. This time, I sat at the head of the table. Not because I demanded it, but because the client pulled out the chair. If she disappears, he said, tapping the clause, so does the deal. No one objected. And the third strand, the most delicate, was information. I didn't give away Halston's secrets. I didn't have to. I simply designed something better. Cleaner integrations, smoother transition protocol. Stripped away the bloated approval processes that had weighed us down. I built a leaner, smarter architecture designed not for legacy bloat, but for agility and scale. I showed the client. They didn't clap. They nodded slowly, respectfully, with the kind of silence that tells you they've already decided. That letter wasn't praise. It was a contract written in trust. The plan was never to ruin Holston. The plan was to make them irrelevant. One clause, one meeting, one quiet acknowledgement that the person they erased still had the blueprint. And now someone else had asked me to build it, this time without compromise. I never planned to draw blood with a pen, but when they handed me a blank contract with my name at the top and said, "Build it how you would have without Holston," I realized something chilling. My revenge wasn't rage. It was blueprint. My silence had been the architecture of their downfall. The room was quiet, filled with contract analysts, government liaisons, and technical officers, but I wasn't there to sell anymore. I was there to lead. I laid out the integration timeline, stripped down the red tape, restructured the reporting ladders, and cut out every unnecessary sign-off. For every step Holston had inflated, I made it leaner, faster, smarter. I wrote in ink what I had once whispered in shadow. No more legacy protocol, no more blind delegation tiers. I could feel their eyes following me, not with suspicion, but hunger. This wasn't about rebuilding what Holston lost. This was about building what they never had the vision to see. And the irony, the system I was drafting was the same one I'd tried for years to get them to adopt. But back then I was a senior coordinator with developmental promise. Now I was the architect with unilateral authority. While I wrote, Claire tried to salvage what she could. I heard through a back channel that she'd attempted a quiet meeting with the Department of Defense, trying to repackage our work under her new firm's banner. But when they asked her about the updated compliance index, one I had invented on a napkin during a red-eye flight, she blanked. She had memorized my slides, but never understood my systems. That was the difference. I didn't perform the job. I was the job. The ink flowed faster the more they fought. Dale apparently panicked, offering to rehire me quietly through an affiliate contractor with a revised title and flexible compensation. Flexible after a 55% pay cut and a cubicle with no nameplate? I didn't respond. I just kept writing. The contract took 3 weeks to finalize, with 9 separate federal compliance officers reviewing every clause. When they reached Clause 13C, the one that mirrored the old Clause 47B, they all paused. "Is this enforceable?" one asked. "It is," I said, "and this time I've got it notarized." That clause no longer protected me. It protected them from going back to Holston. If I was removed, the deal dissolved. This time, it wasn't a hidden blade. It was a signature chiseled in granite. When the last draft was signed, the client asked me one last question. "What do we call this new model?" I answered without hesitation, "Read line." I didn't need to take Holston down. I just needed to make them obsolete. I didn't break the building. I just removed the beam they never noticed was holding it up. The moment they tried to replace me, the floor cracked beneath them and they still couldn't understand why the ceiling was caving in. That's how arrogance works. It's blind to its own scaffolding. I was in a briefing room in DC when the first report came in. Holston's leadership was in chaos. Dale had gone silent. Claire was scrambling to recover documents I had authored, and legal was in damage control mode, trying to justify why Clause 13C had been overlooked. But it wasn't overlooked. It was ignored because they never saw me as a risk. To them, I had always been support, not execution, not essential. So when the Department of Defense officially issued their termination notice, citing breach of continuity oversight and failure to meet clause compliance, Holston's board went nuclear. $1 billion deal wiped in 3 sentences, and my name was in every one of them. They tried to push blame on external counsel, then on internal misalignment. I watched it unfold from afar, sipping tea in a quiet corner cafe as my phone lit up with headlines. Holston loses historic defense contract. Former executive Avery Reed linked to new strategic entity. It was almost too poetic. Almost. The best part, the clause had always been reversible. I could have walked back in, re-entered under a shell firm, nodded politely, and let them save face. But I didn't, because the truth is, I didn't want my old job back. I didn't want the title or the fake smiles or the brittle applause from executives who had once demoted me for outperforming them. I wanted clarity. I wanted them to see what they were without me. And that meant letting them collapse in full view. I got updates from a few loyal friends still on the inside. One told me the boardroom looked like a funeral the morning after the news broke. Another said Dale had a full breakdown in front of the project team, blaming everyone but himself. Claire apparently resigned 2 days later, citing unforeseen structural limitations in execution. And HR, the same HR that once offered me a mentorship track instead of a raise, they posted a job opening that read, looking for experienced contract strategists with federal level negotiation background. Preference for aviation or defense integration history. High resilience required. I laughed. Resilience? I didn't bounce back. I rewrote the gravity. They had built their empire on my discipline, my weekends, my compromises. I had been their foundation, and they cut me loose like a broken fixture. So I let them live with the decision. No sabotage, no whistleblowing, just gravity taking its course. A few weeks later, Readline's site went live. Simple homepage, one sentence across the top. Strategy has a name. It didn't need a logo. The name was enough. A name they tried to erase, but now had to read in every article about the contract they lost. Every report on the transition model they couldn't replicate. Every meeting where someone asked, why didn't we keep her? Some ghosts don't haunt. They build elsewhere. They thought the story ended when they pushed me out. What they didn't expect was that the final chapter was mine to write, and I didn't write it in ink. I wrote it in presence, in headlines, in boardroom silence. I rose, and I didn't leave a note behind. I had been quiet too long, but quiet wasn't weakness. It was surveillance. And by the time I moved, I was already building something they couldn't copy. The day Readline was announced, it wasn't with a press release or a flashy launch party. It was a 5-minute closed-door briefing with 3 industry leaders who had seen me negotiate with integrity when no one else was watching. One of them once said, "You didn't just save the deal, you saved our faith and strategy." That was the real currency. Trust, earned and proven. Within a month, we weren't just being asked to advise, we were being offered lead roles on 2 major integrations. And guess what? Holston didn't even make the short list. They sent feelers, of course, emails from friendly intermediaries, LinkedIn pings, one bold recruiter asking if I'd be open to a healing conversation. I didn't respond because I had nothing left to heal. My revenge wasn't loud, it was structural. I didn't take down Holston. I just rose where they couldn't. I built Readline to operate on the very principles they claimed to champion but never truly respected. Clarity, accountability, and above all, ownership. Every policy had my fingerprint. Every hire understood the blueprint. And slowly, almost painfully, I watched as my former colleagues tried to mimic what they couldn't grasp. Dale started speaking in clipped phrases he'd once mocked me for using. Claire tried to pitch to former clients we had nurtured together, only to find out they'd already signed with us. And me, I was asked to keynote a private summit hosted by the same advisory firm that once declined to return my calls when I wore Holston's badge. The invitation was handwritten. At the event, I stood behind the podium, looked at the sea of sharp suits and frozen smiles, and began my speech with one sentence: never confuse proximity to power with possession of it. It wasn't applause I felt afterward. It was recognition, real clear-eyed recognition from people who had finally seen what happens when the strategist stops building for others and starts building for herself. I don't walk with bitterness anymore. I walk with choice. I don't waste time chasing apologies. They wouldn't be honest, and I don't need them. What I needed was to rebuild on my terms, to let the silence of their downfall speak louder than any vindictive move ever could. And it did. In meetings where Holston's name came up only as a cautionary tale, in articles that tracked how Readline outpaced its competitors by 3/4 in its first year, in private conversations that ended with, "We should have seen her coming." But I was never coming back. That's what they never understood. I didn't want revenge that ended in their ruin. I wanted evolution. I wanted peace that didn't require erasure. So I built forward, not backward. And I rose not to prove them wrong, but to prove myself right. They took my title, my office, and my salary, but they couldn't take the one thing that mattered. The blueprint was never theirs. It was mine. Always was, always will be. They didn't just underestimate me. They discarded me, thinking I'd vanish quietly. But here's the twist. Sometimes the silence they count on becomes the very storm that breaks them. Not with fury, not with revenge porn, but with precision, elevation, and the calm power of reinvention. This isn't just a story about getting back at a toxic company. It's about something deeper, knowing your value even when others try to bury it. In today's world, where layoffs come without warning, where loyalty is often exploited, and where ambition can be mistaken for arrogance, this story reminds us that we don't need to explode to make a point. Sometimes the smartest revenge is building something so unshakable, they have to watch it succeed without them. The real victory wasn't the fall of the company, it was the rise of someone who chose not to beg, not to lash out, not to play dirty. Instead, she played smart. She channeled pain into process, injustice into innovation. She learned that dignity is stronger than desperation, and that when you walk away from a table that doesn't see your worth, you free your hands to build a better one. Or American professionals navigating a post-pandemic job market, especially women, people of color, and those in cutthroat industries. This story is a mirror. Maybe you've been passed over, gaslit, or stripped of what you've built. Maybe you're there right now. This story is here to tell you your silence is not surrender. It's strategy. Just make sure it ends in action. Because the truth is, not every bad boss gets exposed. Not every company crumbles after mistreating someone. But you can choose not to let it define you. You can turn the closed door into a foundation. That's the deeper lesson here. Revenge isn't always about destruction. It's about redirection. It's about outgrowing the smallness of their vision. It's about thriving where you were once told you weren't enough. And the final moral, sometimes forgiveness is self-liberation, but sometimes silence is the sharpest knife. Not because it wounds them, but because it frees you. How to get started today. Take inventory of your professional values. What do you actually stand for? Make a list of 3 things you do differently if you weren't afraid of starting over. Research a competitor or startup where your voice would be heard, not just tolerated. Write 1 paragraph about what you've survived, keep it, read it on the hard days. Now it's your turn. Have you ever been in a situation like this? Drop a comment, share your story. Let's learn from each other. And if this made you think twice about your own worth, subscribe. There's more coming.